Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now, let's start the video. You know, they've been talking for a while now. Are you sure Lord Manderley isn't requesting Father for permission to permanently stay in Winterfell? Harry asked with a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. Stay here? Why? Robb asked with a frown. Lord Wyman is like a good fat puppy trying to please his master. If he could help it, he'd never leave Winterfell and hug all the Starks until he becomes one himself. Harry said with a snicker. Don't let Lord Wyman hear that. I don't think he'd appreciate being compared to a dog, Robb said, his face twitching with a smile as they strolled towards the training arena. Depends on what kind of dog he is being compared with, and whether he'll get to become an honorary Stark. I tell you, Robb, the man is like a fangirl. Oh, what? Robb looked utterly confused. Forget I said anything. Harry shook his head. Robb, as usual, went for training with Sir Roderick in swordplay, while Harry went straight for the archery field. He had expected to see Theon in the archery range, but it was Josian Reed and Mira Reed on the range instead. They had their bows out and punching holes into the straw man strung on the other side of the range. Lord Harrion, Mira Reed dipped her head in deference. Harry hummed as he observed a couple of arrows sticking out of the straw man's chest area. You do realize most soldiers might be wearing armor on their chests. Those arrows might be lucky to find a gap in their armor, or else you must hope they are using boiled leather. Harry plucked a bow from the arena and knocked a bow on the string. Taking careful aim, he let the arrow fly. To his mortification, the arrow missed the mark and hit a few inches short of reaching the neck area of the straw man. He knocked another arrow, and this time he took careful aim. He slowed his breathing and let the arrow fly as he released the gathered air in his lungs. This time, his target was spot on. The arrow found its mark on the neck of the straw man, which made Harry let out a relieved sigh. Phew, I just escaped a major embarrassing moment through sheer luck, Harry mused as he stared thoughtfully at the bow. That was a lucky shot, Arya suddenly said, startling Harry to look behind him and see his sister sneaking into the archery range. Oh, come on, you can't possibly know that, Harry protested, glaring at his little sister. Robb was right, I must keep my martial skills up to par, for appearance sake. Even Arya is noticing my sloppy skill with a bow. Harry thought, yes, I can. You never train with a bow or a sword whenever you're here, Arya accused. But you see, sweet sister, I train daily at Avalon. Harry smiled indulgently at his little sister. No, you don't. Josian butted in as a paragon of truth, earning his ire. I distinctly remember ordering you to bring 2 buckets of hot water to my chambers. Have you done that? Harry glared at the Reed boy who dared to sell him out. But you didn't... Josian started to protest. Are you telling me you didn't follow my orders, Squire? Harry towered over his loud-mouthed squire. I'm sorry, Josian muttered. You should be. Nowadays, you're forgetting a lot of important things happening around you, Harry said with a pointed stare. I guess I'm forgetful. Yes, you are, Squire, Harry nodded, looking all serious and keeping a lid on his sense of glee at knocking the kid down a peg. Yes, you are. But instead of getting looks of understanding or acknowledging his prowess, he got mean looks from his little sister and Mira Reed. Ha! Tough crowd. They spent the next half an hour training in the archery field, during which Harry tried his best not to get embarrassed again. It was an uphill battle to suppress the inclination to use any magical enchantments to meet the mark without fail, but he managed to keep a lid on such thoughts and get the training done, and by the end of it, he learned that he needed to get some more training time if he were to keep his skills polished. Archery was not like using a sword on a battlefield. At least in swordplay, there were a lot of instincts involved. In archery, it was all about keeping a steady breathing and being observant of surroundings. His little impromptu lesson in warfare at least did some good with the Reed children. They were skilled with knives and quick on their feet. This much she knew while watching Josian train with Jon at Avalon. But it was a surprise to see the Reed children were skilled with a bow. They grew up in the hostile terrain of the swamps, contending with crocodiles, lizard lions, snakes, and other creatures that called the neck their home. So he was not surprised by their familiarity with weapons, but he was suitably impressed by Mira Reed's archery skills. He already knew the eldest daughter of Howland Reed was quite skilled with a spear after he watched her spearfish in the neck. If Mira Reed hadn't been Lord Howland's daughter, he'd have offered her a position on his Valkyrie guards. The crannogmen were the first line of defense of the North, and they needed every man, woman, and child at the neck. In the absence of Moat Caelan, it was all the more imperative. While Harry may have struggled with archery somewhat, he was pretty good at handling a spear against Mira. The only reason that he handled himself well against Mira's frog spear was thanks to his lessons with Prince Oberyn. I really need to up my weapons training, Harry muttered to himself while watching Mira instructing Arya on how to handle a bow. While a bow was not his go-to weapon in a fight, he supposed it was something Arya could safely train without injuring herself. His musings were cut short as he felt someone approach him. Turning his head to the side, he found none other than his mother, who looked the least happy. "Why is your sister holding a bow?" Catelyn asked, with a displeased frown marring her face. "She wants to learn archery, and Mira is good at it. She's in good hands." "You have nothing to worry about," said Harry. "It's not who she's with that worries me, it's what she is doing," Catelyn said, frowning as Arya's form was being corrected by Mira. Harry felt his mother was about to pull Arya out of the archery range. Despite his little sister's earlier disrespect, he was not a dick to pull her out of something she genuinely enjoyed. "It's just archery, Mother. Her arms are so thin. She'll lose interest once she realizes it's too difficult to properly pull the string," he said, dismissively. "Now tell me, what is Lord Manderley discussing with Father? They've been at it for hours." "I suspect it's your brother's betrothal." "Really?" Harry perked up. "Does Rob know?" "Not yet. Nothing has been set," Lord Manderley requested the meeting, "and your father is hearing him out," Catelyn said, casting a look at the Great Keep. That just sounded like things were more serious than what his mother was saying. It was no secret that there were many betrothal offers for all his siblings, including himself, from the northern houses and others. "I remember Lord Manderley has 2 granddaughters. Don't tell me you're trying to stick them with Rob and myself." "Do not speak disrespectfully about Lord Manderley's granddaughters as if they are some commodity that can be given away at a whim." Catelyn caught her son's ear between her fingers, but she didn't press down. Harry expertly pulled his left ear out from his mother's grasp. "I wasn't insinuating anything of the like," Harry defended, but he was mindful not to get caught again. "You better not be." Catelyn shot him a warning look. Lord Manderley was interested in matching his eldest granddaughter, Winifred, with Rob. But of course, nothing has been decided. Your father will not make a decision without consulting me. "And Rob," Harry said leadingly, to which there was only silence. "You will consult Rob, won't you?" "He'll be told, of course," Catelyn said with a jerk of her head, which didn't imbue Harry with confidence in his mother's promise. "Why are you so interested in the matters of betrothal? You shouldn't worry about such things." "Yeah, right," Harry thought with a roll of his eyes. The revelation that the Lords of the North were now directly seeking his father with betrothal offers for his siblings made Harry alert. After all, he had many plans and could not allow himself to be tied down in marriage to a northern lady. He supposed it was time to broach the subject of his marriage to Arianne with his father before any promises were made. Eddard sighed tiredly as he stared out of the window of his solar. Winterfell was bustling with almost all the known houses of the north. The lords and their entourage were cordially received into his home to participate in the celebrations. The sky was turning dark, and his daughters had already arranged for their magical fireworks to adorn the night sky. It was one of the most beautiful magic his son taught Sansa. Then Sansa taught it to Arya. To this day, he still marveled at how some squiggly lines carved on a stone could possibly create this spectacle in the night sky. Just then, a brilliant green light filled the night sky with a dull popping sound, and a glowing green wolf's head could be seen above Winterfell. Brilliant, Eddard thought. The celebrations were still ongoing, and Eddard pulled back from the festivities to get some peace of mind. His head weighed a ton after all the talks with his fellow lords. Unlike in the past, there was much to talk about in these gatherings. It was akin to a harvest feast, but then again, those were a joke these days. The harvest feasts Eddard remembered in Winterfell were usually a muted affair compared to the southern houses. The harvests in the north were usually not as bountiful, so the celebrations were also limited in their opulence. It was usually a gathering of lords to ensure they were prepared for a long winter ahead, and a venue to make proper deals in case a region of the north failed to gather sufficient quantities of grain and other food stocks. But these days, no such worries plagued the north. Ever since his son Harrion had cast his magic on the north, the harvest from the neck to the wall was plentiful. Therefore, the harvest feasts in Winterfell usually devolved into taking stock of the excess grain the lords held in their castles and deliberating selling them to the south or in Essos. But the current gathering was not about a harvest feast, nor was it for a wedding. Instead, it was a feast to celebrate the construction of the Sunset Canal and the different constructions launched in the north. Winterfell had undergone a remodeling, as had many of the North's roads. The King's Road was now twice as wide as before, and fully paved from Moat Cailin to the Wall. A straight paved road now stretched from Winterfell to White Harbor. There was the widely acclaimed Wolfswood Road, which connected Winterfell with Avalon and Deepwood Motte. There were already plans to expand that road from Deepwood Motte through the western coast all the way to the Wall. Some of Harryon's plans gave him endless headaches and wonder, not necessarily in that order. There was that ludicrous plan of building roads through giant holes punched through the northern mountains. But then again, if his son could cut a canal through the neck and make ships fly, anything was possible. Sometimes he wondered whether his son was even a mere mortal or one of the old gods in the mortal flesh. The last time he met Lord Omber, the man was talking about some of the northernmost villages of his lands worshipped Harrion as a god and considered him a vessel of the old gods. Of course, he had immediately ensured such talks didn't spread in the north or beyond the neck. There were already enough enemies for House Stark in the world, and he didn't want to give more reasons to the religious fanatics out there to harm his son. While he personally disliked the actions of Harrion and Myr, he hoped that blatant display of power might scare away any of the enemies circling his second son. But too much fear was also a problem. It was one of the reasons why he approved of the feast. He also planned to hold another one in Moat Cailin even though the castle was not completely rebuilt. The constant rain and flooding of the swamps had slowed the pace of construction, which was a shame because he'd have loved to see the restored Moat Cailin as soon as possible, but he supposed he could wait a few more years. Suddenly, his musing fled his mind when he heard a knock on the door. "Father, may I come in?" Edward raised an eyebrow upon hearing Harrion's voice. "Come in." The door swung open, admitting his son to his solar. "Are you busy, Father?" "If you don't mind, I'd like to discuss something with you." Now that gained his attention. "I'm not busy at all. I was just taking a small break from the celebrations." Eddard smiled at his son and pointed to a seat in his solar. "Please sit. What do you want to talk about?" "I was told that Lord Manderley reached out to you with a betrothal offer for Robb." "He did. Are you so concerned for Robb that you'd come to speak with me even before Robb himself?" Eddard asked with an amused smile. "I'm not concerned for Robb. Winifred Manderley is a good political match for Robb and House Stark. House Manderley is wealthy and commands a sizable fleet and men-at-arms. She is also the heiress to White Harbor after her father, Sir Wallace Manderley. If Sir Wallace don't have a male heir, the seat of White Harbor would belong to Winifred and her children." "I see," Eddard eyed his son with keen interest. "You came here to offer your approval of this match." "No," Harry shook his head. "I merely said what I know to be true. In the end, the decision rests with you and Robb." Eddard stared at his son, who did not make much sense regarding his intentions. "You want to say something. Did you do something untoward?" Eddard asked curiously while preparing himself for the bad news. "Nothing untoward has happened, Father. I merely want to discuss with you about any betrothal offers that came for me." Eddard stared at his son comically before he let out a chuckle. Sometimes he just forgets how young Harrion was and the worries that come with that age. "If you're worried about me accepting any betrothal offers on your behalf, you don't have to. I don't think this is the right time." "I want you to accept the one that came from Doran Martell." Harrion suddenly spoke up, making Eddard's eyes widen in surprise. Eddard stared at his son for a long moment, and slowly a calculative look overtook his features. "You want to wed Arianne Martell?" Eddard inquired curiously. "Yes." The fact that his son said that with a straight face didn't surprise him one bit. Arianne was so unlike normal children. His son's thoughts were at a level that was beyond his siblings and any other children his age. He knew his son's sudden interest in wedding the Dornish princess had nothing to do with Harrion finding the Martell heiress attractive. At least, that wouldn't be the sole reason, he amended. Any boy in his son's age would be enamored with a beautiful woman. It was only natural. He was also reminded that Dorne now hosted Prince Aegon. That piece of information was shared by his son, and he still found it difficult to accept that one of Rogier's children was alive and safely living in Dorne. But Eddard needed to know more before he said anything. "Is this why you visited Dorne? You wanted to meet Princess Arianne?" Eddard prodded. That is one of the reasons I also wanted to meet Aegon Targaryen with my own eyes to see whether he was real or merely a mummer. And what do you think? Eddard prodded even though he felt like someone put a block of ice over his heart. I can't be sure. The mortals seem to think the boy is Yaxley's son. He is well-spoken and a good swordsman. Did you tell Jon? Eddard asked, looking searchingly into his son's stormy gray eyes. Not yet, Harrion admitted. I haven't confirmed whether this Aegon is Rhaegar's son or a puppet in a plan made after Robert Baratheon took the throne. I see. Eddard bowed his head and silently gazed into his palms, deep in thought. He knew Harrion would not take an action without a reason. There was more going on in the background of his son's interest in the Dornish princess. He already knew his son's ambition of northern independence, but he couldn't fathom how that ambition correlated to Dorne. Dorne was too far away from the north, and it was a desert principality, making it an inconsequential place for the north. He could not see any martial advantage either, since Dorne would undoubtedly oppose northern independence if they intended to support Aegon Targaryen to claim the Iron Throne. It was one of the reasons why he didn't even consider the betrothal offer much thought when Doran Martell broached the subject. You met Arianne Martell at Dorne. What was she like? Edward asked. She is tall, bold, beautiful, Harrion trailed off awkwardly. There is something else you're not telling me, Edward observed before his eyes narrowed in worry. Don't tell me you're planning a Targaryen restoration. No, I'm not, said Harrion with an incredulous look. Why would I try to restore a Targaryen to the Iron Throne? What else am I supposed to think when you say you want me to approve a betrothal between you and the Dornish princess? Eddard asked, pinning his son with a hard stare. There are other reasons why I want this to happen. Harrion muttered, and those reasons being... Eddard looked expectantly at his son, which launched a half-hour-long talk about Dorne and all the little crooked plans his son had in store for the Desert Principality. Eddard watched his son leave his solar with a sigh and rubbed his temples as he could feel a headache settle in. Once again, he felt like there were too many needless plots, and this time around, Harrion was eyes himself as a tool in a game of shadows. It left a bitter taste in his mouth, but at the same time, he was starting to see something more clearly. My son may have inherited the looks of a Stark, but his mind is all. Hoster Tully might be so happy that at least one of his grandchildren inherited his acumen in playing the great game, Eddard thought. After spending a few more minutes in his solar, he left for the feast hall, where the bards and jugglers entertained the guests. There were arrangements to be made regarding the travel to Moat Cailin, and he needed to ensure his men were ready to host all the guests at the castle for the big event. The bards were already calling it the Waterhammer, and everyone in the north was going to the Neck to see it happen before their eyes. The sound of hooves thundered across the King's Road, stretching out into the Neck until it came to a halt once the incomplete towering towers came into view. It looks intimidating, said Jon, staring at the completed portion of Moat Cailin from the northern side of the castle. Not as half as intimidating as it used to be, Harry said, smiling as he laid eyes on one of the most strategically important castles in the north. But it soon will be. Harry looked down at the valley ahead, holding the swampland of the Neck and the castle of Moat Cailin that stands as the bulwark against any southern invaders. Even in its reduced state, Moat Cailin was an easily defensible castle against any southern army simply because of the swamp surrounding it for miles. Fighting in a swampland like this one was the nightmare of any marching army. Yet Harry remained determined to improve the living conditions around Moat Cailin, for Jon's sake. He knew his brother deserved better than to reside in the midst of a swamp. The northern parts of the swamp, largely caused by flooding due to rain, were not the contribution of the Fever River. The occasional flooding in the Neck also spilt over the excess water into the southern part of the castle, leaving the land muddy and swamp-like. This led to the destruction of the King's Road on numerous occasions. He knew it so well because the workers had complained that the King's Road would go underwater once it rained in the area, making it impossible for them to transport stone to Moat Cailin. This was the same complaint some merchants had with the Neck, but they knew when to traverse the road. After all, rains were seasonal, and the merchants knew to avoid the rainy season when they traveled to the north. At first, paving the roads with stone slabs delivered better transit along the Neck, but repeated rains and flooding caused much damage to parts of the road. Come on, lads. Let's go ahead before the rest of them catch up with us. Smajan Umber hollered, his boisterous voice echoing across the landscape. The heir to Last Hearth rode away on his horse towards the castle with no care. Hold on. Harry stopped his brothers and other heirs of the northern houses from joining Smazian. Just wait and watch. It didn't take long for a Smaljung to encounter a small problem. The road ahead through the swamp was underwater, and it became increasingly difficult to see where the road was on the ground. So, it took only a matter of time before they saw Smaljung let out a loud yelp before falling down with his horse into the swamp. The neck has been subject to heavy rain for the last 2 weeks. Please don't charge head first into the castle. This will be the result. Harry nodded at Smaljung, who climbed to his feet with some effort, but was covered in mud like his horse. "All right, Stark, we'll follow you," said Torrhen Karstark. "If we follow Harry, we'll be far worse off than Smaljung." Robb snickered. "Well, he's not wrong," Harry admitted with a grin while turning his eyes on the Reed siblings. "Time for you two to step in." Under the careful guidance of Mira and Jojen and the few Cranogmen that accompanied them, they traversed the treacherous road ahead. Being native to the neck, the Cranogmen and the Reed siblings were competent in safely traversing the swamp. "Despite owning the land around Mocha Island, we have no idea how to travel in the swamp, and that's sad," said Harry. "You do one thing, Harry. You stay in the castle and travel back and forth across the swamp, and then teach us what you learned," Robb said with a snicker. Harry rolled his eyes at his twin's piss-poor attempt at a joke. "How about I just drain the swamp and make the land dry?" Harry asked. "You can do that?" Robb asked with surprise before realization flashed in his eyes. "Of course you can. You can cut a canal through the neck. Draining a swamp would be as easy as breathing." "Not as easy as you might think," Harry said with a shrug, as their horses carefully trotted through the swamp. "It'll require many small canals to be cut in this place and let the water naturally drain away." "Really? No magical remedies are available to solve the swamp problem?" Jon asked curiously. "There is," Harry said shortly. "Well, what is it?" Robb asked eagerly. "I could cut the canals using magic," Harry answered, enjoying the disappointed look on his brother's face. "Well, that's not any fun," Robb muttered. "If you're after fun, brother, it all starts there." Harry pointed at the castle ahead. While everyone was skeptical of his claim about having any fun in the swampy, unfinished castle of Moat Cailin, they realized he was not bluffing during the night. The mosquito-infested swamp was not exactly a picnic spot, and the incomplete construction of the castle meant they had to depend on erecting tents. Harry put up a wide area shield, along with a repelling charm that made their area free from rain to ensure rain didn't mess up their short stay in the region. Like in Winterfell, a feast was held to commence the celebration, and Harry provided the fun by popping bottles of spiced ale from Pentos, Tirash, and Dorne. If he had known the secret ingredients used to make fire whiskey, he'd have gone ahead and made that old delicacy. Unfortunately, he was not an expert in the ingredients or methods used to fix magical drinks, which was a shame. But the spiced ale and wine he brought from abroad was enough of a fun experience for the night. As the Northern lords and their families enjoyed the revelry, it was made all the better with bards and mummers reenacting scenes from old folk tales about the children of the forest and kings of the past. There were many songs he liked, especially The Wolves in the Hills and The Burning of the Ships. Harry's favorite of the evening was a play about Theon Stark, the Hungry Wolf. The man was the first king in the North who united the entire North to face the Andal invasion. He liked this particular Stark king for the man's numerous military victories. If it wasn't for Theon Stark, the North couldn't have survived one of the most precarious times in Westerosi history. It was no simple feat to unite the warring regions of the North under one crown and face numerous foreign enemies like the Andals and the Ironborn. He didn't know why, but the story of Theon Stark crossing the Narrow Sea to burn the Andal towns and villages to dissuade them further, launching invasions into Westeros, struck him deeply. Perhaps it is because of my own naivete to see the threat of Muggles too late. Harry frowned as unpleasant memories he had long suppressed came to the forefront of his mind, accompanying that train of thought. Harry sneaked away from the campfires, bards and plays being done inside the castle, and found a secluded spot where he could watch the sky. The canal was only the latest attempt from his side to show the might and greatness of magic to the people. His true goal, however, remained at the forefront of his mind. He wanted magic to be accepted in the North and build a nation so distinct that it celebrates the power and usefulness of magic. He wanted magic to become something inalienable in the North so that it could sustain and thrive for thousands of years. Magic will spread across Westeros in good time and become integral to all kingdoms, Harry mused. He didn't know whether he'd be alive to see his plans come to fruition. After all, the current scope of his planning was on a 50-year time frame for the North, Anything could happen within such a short time. Despite the initial acceptance of magic and whatnot, he knew there were elements within the North that provide stiff resistance to the changes he brought. In the future, he expected more resistance to form, especially when those with magical power start to exert their dominance in the land. It was an inevitable event, as far as Harry was concerned. Those with magic would ask themselves why they're being ruled by those without. That fundamental question would undoubtedly change the current hierarchy in the North. Unless, of course, the northern houses suddenly started to develop magical power in their bloodlines. Harry didn't know whether he'd live long enough to see all that. His immortality was in flux, as of now. He still held the allegiance of the Three Hollows in his soul, but he didn't know whether the Hollows granted him power over his own flesh. From what he had seen, his body was aging like any normal human. Therefore, there was no reason to assume he retained immortality of the flesh. He was certainly not invulnerable. At least he knew that for sure. The uncertainty of his immortality or mortality was why he was intent on maximizing the number of the magical populace and training them in the arts of different magical disciplines. He had already started a small school for ancient runes and arithmancy, which was for both magical and non-magical people. That particular school ran in a hall of Castle Avalon intended to raise a new generation of rune masters. Runecraft was one of the primal arts of wizard kind, easily transferable to non-magical people, and it was already proving to be quite useful. More and more improvements were being made in glass-making thanks to some experimentation in the runes already employed in the process. One day, he hoped there'd be enough magical blood in the North to charge all those runes his people were craving. Right now, it was either him, his students, or the Valkyrie capable of charging the runes. Thinking of his Valkyrie guards made him remember that he ought to find suitable matches for those women. They couldn't be allowed to spend their time guarding him for the rest of their lives. Their magic had developed under his tutelage, and he hoped their progeny would be born with the blessing of magic. They were not as strong in magic as Jon or himself, but their blood was potent. Of course, that also raised the question of what to do with the Valkyrie as a whole, especially the bows in Valkyrie possession. Harry was broken out of his musings when his pocket warmed up almost unnaturally. The two-way mirror, Harry realized. He immediately took out the shrunken mirror from his pocket and enlarged it with a touch of magic. The mirror's surface rippled before Anya's face appeared on the mirror. "My lord, it's done." "The runestone has done its work," said Anya with a grin tugging at the corner of her lips. He could see the excitement on Anya's face. He supposed the runestone worked quite splendidly, just like it did wonders in Avalon. "Good. I take it the mining along the surveyed land has been checked." "Yes, my lord. There is no mistake. Everything is in place." You'll have till tomorrow afternoon. Check everything once more. Ensure the rune stones are synced and responding naturally to the master runestone. I take it the bridge is also complete and reinforced." "Yes, my lord. The bridge has been successfully placed and reinforced," Anya said, bobbing her head. "Good, then we'll see you tomorrow." Harry cut off the transmission to the Liberator and went back to stargazing. Thankfully, the rain clouds had dispersed in the sky, showing the stars in the night sky. But the wind still persisted. It was a beautiful night, and he hoped the days ahead would be as fruitful for his family as they are today. Jon was amused to see Robb and Theon were being reprimanded by Lord Stark for being drunk out of their minds. Last night, Robb and Theon had become so drunk that they stumbled into the Mormont's tents and pretended to be wolves. He laughed so hard when he saw howling Robb and Theon escorted out by Lady Major Mormont and her daughters. It was quite the satirical sight and a treat to his eyes. Somehow Robb and Theon got it into their minds that they could find a bear in the Mormont's tent and hire it to play the flute or dance or some such nonsense. Either way, Lord Stark and Lady Mormont were not amused, even though Jon found it hilarious. He suspected he'd have ended up as drunk as Robb and Theon if he hadn't spent the night by the side of Sansa and Arya. It was morning, and everyone in Moke Island was drunk out of their minds, not just Robb and Theon. It took the Northmen till afternoon to get out of the grip of spiced ale and wine. Harry brought from abroad. Thankfully, everyone was ready to see the canal coming to fruition by afternoon, and they set out north from their camp. "How is Harry going to make the canal?" Arya asked. Jon sighed for the umpteenth time as he faced the question from Arya once again. The worst part was he couldn't just ride away because Arya was riding with him on his horse. "Using runes, I suppose," he answered clandestinely, as if sharing a great secret. "I know that too. I want to know more details." Arya whined. "Why don't you ask Harry? He's the one who knows it all." Jon said tiredly. He runs away whenever I ask about it. Arya complained, he knows I hate secrets, but he loves to annoy me. Believe it or not, he does that to everyone, Jon said with a shake of his head. Even you? Rosier looked surprised. Even me, Jon nodded. The radio looked at her brother suspiciously. I don't believe you. Harry wouldn't do anything without telling you. You're lying to me. Harry accused while shooting him a displeased stare. I was only asked to help with carving some runes. Besides, we're nearly there. You can see how it unfolds with your own eyes soon enough. Then at least ride faster, Arya demanded. Jon sighed and caved in to his little sister's demand. He urged his horse forward and rode ahead of the column. He couldn't help but chuckle when Arya made faces at Robb and Theon as they passed them by. Strangely enough, he realized Harry was nowhere to be seen. He must have ridden ahead, Jon thought. It didn't take long for Jon to notice a significant change in the landscape. The road ahead was slightly upturned and the land had almost risen. It felt like he was riding up a slope as he moved forward until he came across a huge stone bridge. A bridge? But there was no bridge here before, Arya said, confused. His sister was not the only one confused. Jon was similarly confused, but for entirely another reason. He knew there was a need for a bridge across the canal, but he could see no canal, but he noted the bridge was built quite high from the ground, and the slope he was experiencing made sense. The entire land on the south side of the bridge had risen somehow, while the land below the bridge had sunken. It felt like his eyes were playing a trick on him. I suppose this bridge is supposed to go across the canal, Jon muttered. But I don't see a canal. Isn't there supposed to be water in the canal? Arya asked as she looked around for any evidence of a canal. Well, let's see for ourselves, Jon said as he urged the horse forward and rode into the bridge. As he drew closer, Jon noticed that the stone bridge was unlike ordinary stone bridges. It had no blemishes on its surface. It was as if the bridge was a monolith structure. The bridge was wide enough for many carts to go back and forth simultaneously. By his estimation, it looked like the bridge was over 50 feet wide. The floor was neat and unblemished. It was entirely made out of smooth stone. It reminded him of the smooth castle walls of Avalon. But the fascinating details didn't end there. There was a small running garden by the side of the bridge on both sides. There were also protective railings running on both sides. Is this bridge as long as the wall? Arya asked. I doubt it, but this was built by Harry. He might. It's less than 1,000 feet, Harry said, startling Jon and Arya. They turned around on the horse and saw Harry standing behind them. When did you? Jon started. I was waiting here all along. I told you to always be on alert. That ring on your finger is not for decoration, you know, Harry scolded. Jon groaned upon hearing the usual advice from his brother. Don't be lazy, brother. The most dangerous enemy attacks when our guard is down, said Harry. I doubt there are any enemies on this newly constructed bridge. Jon grumbled reproachfully as he climbed down from his horse and helped Arya dismount as well. Thankfully, Harry never got to reply, as Arya started throwing question after question about the bridge and the canal. Jon amusedly watched as Harry struggled to keep Arya appraised while at the same time not answering some things. When did you build the bridge? I don't think it was here when we passed through, Jon asked as they waited for the rest of the Northerners to catch up. It was built last day, Harry said with a shrug. Jon didn't ask more because, as far as magical feats were concerned, this was relatively mild given what he knew about Harry's skill with magic. Oh, look! They're here! Arya pointed south and shouted excitedly. Sure enough, Jon could see everyone had arrived. The Stark direwolf could be seen fluttering in the distance, and he could make out Robb riding ahead with Theon and other northern heirs. Once everyone had come aboard the bridge, Harry, under pressure from incessant nagging from Arya, started the carving of the Sunset Canal. There was no flashy magic involved in the process, to his sister's disappointment. Harry merely plucked an ordinary stone from his pocket and tapped it with his ring. The runes carved on the stone started to glow as magic flowed through the runestone. Jon watched with bated breath, like everyone else, as Harry held out the glowing runestone over the bridge's railing and dropped it unceremoniously to the ground below. His gaze followed the eerily glowing runestone all the way to the bottom of the bridge, where it simply disappeared. Once the runestone touched the ground, there was a tremendous rumbling sound, as if a thunderstorm was brewing in the distance. Suddenly, the earth below was gouged apart before his eyes. As far as his eyes could see, the earth below the bridge was gouged out, and the topsoil vanished into thin air, from east to west from the bridge. This happened before their eyes. They looked around in wonder as a wide, lengthy crater formed on the ground below, stretching out for leagues as far as their eyes could see. John picked up on a distant rumble from the east when the fervor over the gouged earth died down. When he looked east from the bridge, he saw muddy water gushing out sporadically along the length of the canal. "The sea?" John asked, doubtfully, looking curiously at Harry. "No, not yet. This is just some local water source. It'll take time for the sea to arrive," said Harry. However, it didn't take too long for the sea to rush in from the south. Before the sun set, the canal was teeming with water. But there were no tides as he had expected. The water in the canal was almost calm and controlled for it to be the sea. The sea he had seen so far was untamable and ripe with tides. He shook off such thoughts away in favor of joining the revelry. He was sure there was much more to the canal than just having water flowing through it and a bridge across it. He knew his brother never did things halfway, but he was patient to see what other secrets the Sunset Canal held. The first ships to sail through the newly built Sunset Canal were from White Harbor. There was a massive order of glass utensils from Braavos. The canal's opening aligned with the arrival of Braavosi merchants who were ready to have their glass transported through the lengthy road in the north. But now their fortunes had taken a turnaround, as they were sent forth from White Harbor with a ship full of spice that just arrived in White Harbor. The spice would get unloaded in Avalon and reloaded with crates full of glass and ice before setting themselves on a journey to Braavos. Only after the Manderley ship had safely sailed into Blazewater Bay did Harry call back the Liberator from escorting the ship. With the successful opening of the canal, the Northern Lords had left the neck for their keeps. Harry and John remained at Moat Kylan, as there was still work to be done. Harry's primary concern was to ensure the seawater from the canal wouldn't contaminate the fresh water of the neck. The Crenadumans' livelihood depended on the game in the neck, which in turn relied on the Fever River and the Green Fork. The canal's proximity to the Fever River necessitated the implementation of precautions in case of a flood or a storm. Harry oversaw the construction of embankments around the river to control the flow of fresh water and the enchantments along the banks of the river to desalinate the water. To some extent, in case the embankments failed, providing a sense of reassurance to all. There were also plans to cut small channels to drain any excess water in case of heavy rain or storm. Then there was the progress of Moat Kylan's restoration itself to consider. Harry and John spent a week setting up some wards and charms around the castle to keep it safe from the elements. After spending some time with the workers and seeing the struggle they went through with transporting building materials through the muddy terrain, Harry promised to give them help with his smaller airship. The first airship he made was sleek and perfect for hauling building materials. He had used it quite extensively to speed up the construction of the Wolfswood Road, so using it to speed up the construction of Moat Kylan was not a radical idea to pursue. With most of the arrangements made in Moat Kylan, Harry and John left for Avalon on the Liberator. By the time the Liberator landed on Avalon, the Manderley merchant ship had finished unloading the spices and had brought in crates filled with glass. With Mada's destruction, the North was the only major source of glass producer on either side of the narrow sea. The merchants in White Harbor were quite eager to capture the market in the Free Cities and Westeros before the surviving Mattermen established themselves once again. Harry doubted the Meermen would establish their glass trade anytime soon. He had destroyed much of their glass-making infrastructure when he attacked Myr. He had even used the wildfire caches near the streets where glass workers lived. Even if those few that survived went to other cities, it'd take them time to set up such infrastructure elsewhere. Of course, Harry only welcomed the competition even if more glassmakers were to come about in different cities. Avalonian glass was cheaper and of high quality. More competition would only make his people more competent and look for improvement. Already, the addition of artisans from Lys and Tyrosh was paying its dividends. Their unique understanding of dyes and skill in handicrafts improved the aesthetics of the glass produced in Avalon. Avalon could now make a wide variety of dyes and colored glass. However, the ice trade was the most interesting thing Harry was focused on. After all, he had explicitly cut some deals with the Free Cities on this particular issue. With the ice trade came the ice boxes that were necessary for keeping the ice. Only Avalon produced iceboxes, and he intended to hold a monopoly for as long as possible. The iceboxes he produced were layered with magical charms powered by runes. In the future, someone would devise mundane methods of making iceboxes, Until then, he alone possessed the capability to supply iceboxes to Essos and Westeros. It was already making a killing in Dorne, where ice had now become a highly sought luxury. Just as the hot Dornish sun made his people rich, Harry thought the warm Essosi sun would bring even more coin. "Are our merchant ships ready?" Harry asked as he walked through the harbor with Sellos' pool. "The ships were always ready, my lord. It is the sailors that we should worry about." "What about the sailors?" Harry asked as he inspected the ships moored in the harbor of Avalon. "They've never sailed the narrow sea. We'll be sending our ships to an alien sea for our sailors. I have asked Lord Wyman to provide some of his crew to our ships for our first voyages into Essos. I'll also have the fleet provide an escort to the merchant ships," said Harry. "A warship as escort for our merchant ships? That incur unnecessary costs, my lord." Salas cautioned. "I'm aware," Harry nodded, knowing well that a significant portion of the profit from the trade would go into the costs of keeping a warship as an escort for his merchant ships. After all, a warship required weapons, food, and water for the men's upkeep. Then there were the port duties to consider and any repairs that might become essential. Such costs are bearable in return for experience for our sailors," Harry said, his mind going back to some of his plans for the narrow sea and the interests that lay in the area. "Besides, there is another reason I want our fleet to have a keen understanding of the Bight and the narrow sea." "The sisterman," Sellos said hesitantly. "You catch on quite quickly, Saxley." Harry smiled at his castellan. "Call the captains to my solar. I need to have a word with them." Within the hour, the 4 captains of his fleet stood before him. The current disposition of his fleet was limited to 80 ships, with 4 captains in charge of 20 ships each. Out of those 80 ships, only 60 were fully crewed and battle-ready. The rest were still undergoing some patchwork, and the crew was being trained. The fleet, being so young, also left him with inexperienced high-ranking officers, so he only had 4 major captains heading a large fleet. He had even held back on giving these men the rank of Commodore simply because he didn't have that many experienced captains or enough fights to test his captains. Harry stared at the 4 men standing before him. Captain Simeon, Captain Nympton, and Captain Gregory stood before him with their cap in hand. Captain Vince was stationed at Blacktide overseeing the culling of ironborn from the seas. So, the venerated fleet captain attended the meeting through a two-way mirror. "Please sit." "Thank you, my lord," they chorused with a bow before taking their seat. Harry took out his wand and tapped the table as the 4 men sat on the other side of the table. Bright gold lines appeared on the table, converging to become a map of the Bight. However, this was no ordinary map. The map that came alive on the table was the live representation of the Bight in the narrow sea. Ships could be seen and represented on the map in scale along the shores of the 3 islands and White Harbor. Some ships could be seen prowling the narrow sea close to the Braavosi shores. The canal is now open for transit, and our merchant ships will set sail to Essos within the week. The fleet will escort them, but you have a secondary objective. Harry started gaining the attention of the captains. "The sistermen have preyed on our merchants for far too long. It's time that they face the consequences for daring to disrupt our trade and attack our people. Not a single ship of theirs is to survive in the seas. If you see them, you'll destroy them and leave none alive." My lord." Captain Simeon looked slightly alarmed. "Wouldn't that start a war with the Vale?" "The sistermen have attacked us with impunity so far." "Did war break out?" Harry asked. "No, my lord," Captain Simeon said stiffly. "Then they'll not wage war, if they know what is good for them and allow us to cull these pirate scum from the islands." "We'll do our best to clean the seas of these pirates, my lord," Captain Gregory said a tad eagerly by the glint in the man's onyx eyes. "Good," Harry nodded. "You are permitted to arm the ships with exploding scorpion bolts and two-way mirrors. This map will be available to all the ships through the two-way mirrors. Normal escort procedures are still in effect. One ship will always remain by the side of our merchant ships, while the others engage the pirates in battle." "Yes, my lord," the captains nodded. "Captain Vance, how goes your mission in the Iron Islands?" Harry asked, focusing on the scarred face visible in the two-way mirror. "Our spies in Pike are reporting Victorian Greyjoy has ordered the cutting of all trees on the island. He intends to rebuild the Iron Fleet. But we've strangled the island with a blockade, and no one is going in or out of the island except for our spies. Greyjoy faces increasing difficulty administering the island in the old ways without looting others. He is forced to make his people farm to feed themselves." "I see," Harry hummed thoughtfully. We've been having some light resistance from ships based out of the Lonely Light. As you know, we have yet to mine the seas around the distant island, which leaves us blind to their movements. I'll have the snitches delivered to you, Captain Vance. You may mine the seas to map the region. Keeping the Ironborn contained is a top priority. Harry promised. Have there been any movements in Harlaw? Lord Roderick has kept the peace on the island. Our spies are keeping watch over Asha Greyjoy and her clique. But so far, they've been occupied by Victarion's actions. I see! Has Victarion started building his ships? Harry asked curiously. He has, my lord, but there is little progress. We have ensured Pike remains isolated from the rest. There are internal divisions among the Ironborn. The Ironborn of Saltcliff, Great Wyke, Old Wyke, and Orcamont are all disillusioned with the rule of Victarion, said Captain Vance. Good, keep them divided. If Victarion is building his fleet, I want to know the location. Yes, my lord. Harry dismissed them all and looked thoughtful as he drummed his thumbs against the desk. With the Sunset Canal now open, his fleet faced the real test of whether they could control the Biden Blazewater Bay. On one end were the pirates based on the Three Sisters. On the other side, there were the Ironborn pirates intent on looting the hard-working people of Westeros. Despite the burning of Mare, the attacks on Manderley's ships had not stopped. It had slowed down considerably, but the attacks were by no means at an end. He doubted it'd ever end until the Sistermen were properly dealt with. The Three Sisters were a cause of friction between the Vale and the North ever since the Andals conquered the Vale under House Arryn. The Andal Wars had caused bitter and bloody battles to be waged in the seas, and most of those wars had been fought on the Three Sisters. Over time, those three islands adopted a distinct culture far removed from the First Men or the Andals. However, the Sistermen had aligned with the Vale of Arryn in the bitter struggle between the Andals and the First Men. Harry didn't care one whit about the historical loyalties of the Sistermen or their supposed betrayal, as some in the North still grouch about. The Sistermen took the pragmatic decision of looking after their self-interest in an age of endless bloodshed and religious warfare. But now, things were different. No one was attacking the Sistermen, but they were intent on inviting war to their islands by providing a haven for pirates. He suspected the Sistermen had grown too comfortable in the fictitious protection they enjoyed being part of the Vale and the Seven Kingdoms. They have slumbered in willful ignorance for the last decade and never realized the strength the North had accumulated under the lordship of Lord Eddard Stark. It's time they realized times have changed, and if they pull the wolf's tail, they better be ready to face the pack. Harry decided. Arianne scowled at the ridiculousness of the situation. She should have been in Sunspear, enjoying her time with her cousins and friends. Then came the official summons from her father, forcing her to ride across the desert on short notice, wondering why her father was suddenly calling her. It was not as if she had done something to offend her father lately. Why do you think Prince Doran has summoned you? It's so unlike Prince Doran to summon you to the Water Gardens without any cause, said Nymeria. I have no idea, Arianne muttered with a frown, adjusting the veil protecting her face from the dusty wind. The wind was one of the reasons she was cross with her father for forcing her into the desert in the windy season. He could have just told me what he wanted to say, instead of forcing me to travel through this blasted desert wind, Arianne thought with a scowl. Are you sure you didn't do anything? Maybe you said something to someone that has reached Prince Doran's ear. Nymeria said as they rode through the desert on their horses against the strong winds. What could I possibly say that'd warrant any of this? Arianne asked with a huff, while her cousin laughed at her misfortune. I don't know why you're laughing, Arianne said with a dirty look directed at her cousin. You're here with me, slogging through the desert. That may be true, but I'm not the one Prince Doran has summoned. Nymeria said gleefully. Who knows what sort of trouble you're in? Arianne scowled behind the veil and focused on getting to the Water Gardens faster. Whatever awaited her, she wanted it to end sooner rather than later. With that thought in mind, Arianne urged her steed forward. Soon she found herself in the safe walls of the Water Gardens. As she walked inside, children from all walks of life ran around the place and enjoyed their time in the halls built by her ancestors. Her eyes fell on a door leading to the chamber where she and Nymeria had spent the night with Harrion. Her eyes found Nymeria, and they shared a sultry grin at the reminder of that particular night. The guards escorting them came to a halt outside a door and only bid Arianne to enter. She entered her father's room, leaving her cousin to stand outside the door with the guards. To her surprise, her father sat on a chair instead of his usual wheelchair. She had known Harren had given some advice to her father about removing gout on his legs. It had something to do with some special cherries and lemons or some such thing. But she never realized her father had recovered to this extent. It's not gone completely, but I'm recovering faster. I need to use a walking stick, but it's better than getting stuck in a wheelchair, said Doran, his onyx eyes trained on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. I suppose we ought to express our gratitude to Harren. Arianne commented breezily. Indeed, Doran nodded placidly. There is more news from the north that might interest you. Oh, she raised a delicate eyebrow. Harren Stark has carved out his ambitious Sunset Canal through the neck, connecting the Bight with Blazewater Bay. With this canal, his fleet can now access the narrow sea. Arianne's eyes widened. She shouldn't have been that surprised at Harren's success, considering he was the man of impossible things. But it was not every day that one hears about a long canal that connects two built so easily. Truly, he did it, just like that. He has, and word has spread throughout the realm of this great feat. His powers are truly something the world has never seen. Not even the water mages of the Ronar could claim to tame two seas to do as they bid. The gods have truly blessed the Starks. Arianne hummed noncommittally, her mind elsewhere. If she was being honest, the gods had blessed Harren in many other ways than just his magical prowess. The things he did to Nem and me that night, Arianne shivered at the thought. But I didn't summon you to talk about the canal. Lord Eddard Stark has written back and approved our betrothal offer, said Doran. Upon hearing this, Arianne's eyes widened, and a broad smile flowered on her face. That was quite possibly the best news she had heard in a while. I'll send Oberyn to discuss the matter in detail with Lord Stark. Do you have something to say, Arianne? Asked Doran. I should talk with Nymeria and Thyem. Arianne said with a slight stutter. I see, Doran said slowly before sighing. We have time, and I need to inform your mother and discuss this with your uncle. We can speak candidly at a later date. Taking the dismissal for what it was, Arianne withdrew from her father's solar and dragged Daenerys to a secluded corner of the keep. She didn't waste any time and regaled her cousin with what she learned from her father. If my father is going to the north, maybe we should accompany him. It'd be nice to meet Harren before everything is finalized, and we do need to discuss what'll happen afterwards, said Nymeria. What is there to discuss? We share my husband as we agreed. He can have us together or separately in bed. We discussed this, Nyben. Arianne whispered. Not that, silly. Nymeria swatted her arm with a roll of her eyes. You have to think about your children and the line of succession of Sunspear. This'll be the first time a heiress of House Martell marries a lord from the north. The succession must be settled before anything else. Oh, right. There's a plan for that. Arianne tried to cover up the fact that she had largely ignored that particular facet of what came after the marriage. Why do I feel that you completely forgot about the succession in your rush to marry Harren? Nymeria said, eyeing Arianne with an exasperated look. I didn't forget. There's a plan. Really? Nymeria raised a brow skeptically. What is this plan? Let me hear it, or have I erred in thinking my cousin lost her sight on her seat of power? Oh, come off it, Nem. Arianne rolled her eyes and covered up the fact that she didn't give it much thought. Let's discuss something less boring, like the fact that we might yet visit our love soon enough, and we might chance upon his miraculous canal. Harry lounged on the chair with his feet over the table while nursing a cup of the sweetest wine in his possession. The North didn't have vineyards, which made them dependent on wine from the South. Despite the colorful glass bottle, which gave off the appearance that the wine came from the North, it came from southern Westeros. He just brought barrels of wine in bulk from the South, had them repackaged in colorful glass bottles in Avalon, and then sold them off at exorbitant prices to the free cities. It was a dick move, but it was good business and an easy way to make some nice silver from the free cities. The better the glass and colorful designs were, the more he charged in silver. That was the initial plan. But now he was looking to expand a little bit. He was working on a vineyard in Bear Island and Avalon. The people in Bear Island didn't have much going for them, and the Mormonts were economically in a bind. All thanks to Jorah Mormont's actions. The ice trade had started to get them on their feet slightly, but the blow to their reputation was not easily recovered. Ever since Harry helped them out at their lowest point, the Mormonts had sworn themselves to him and Avalon. So, setting them up with some vineyards sounded like a perfect idea. Besides, hogging all the wealth to one place was a bad economic policy. Money had to exchange hands and move across borders for a healthy economy to flourish. The lack of workers on his land was another factor in keeping the new planned vineyards on Bear Island. But Harry wanted a small vineyard to function in Avalon just to serve his personal needs and perhaps even his guests. Avalonian wine, or maybe Avalonian red? It has a nice ring to it. Harry muttered absently, eyeing the positions of his ships shown on the table. Suddenly, the table showing the position of his ships on the bight started blinking with red light instead of gold and yellow. That made him sit up and take notice. The merchant ships he had sent forth through the Sunset Canal had never been attacked. The first 2 voyages were quite smooth and went without any incident. This was the first time the warships signaled that they had spotted a pirate ship. Harry frowned as he channeled magic into his power ring and manipulated the table to show an exploded view of the area projected into the air. He identified 2 ships that had set off the alarm. It looked like what appeared to be pirate ships closing in on his merchant ships. But he could be wrong because the alarm had gone off other times, as well, when other merchant ships came too close to his ships. The sensory rune matrix he encoded within his ships could never discern pirate ships from other normal ships. However, it was quite a niche advantage of his ships, as they could give advanced warnings to the ship's captain. "What is happening?" Jon asked as he welcomed himself into Harry's lair. Right now, nothing much. 2 ships seem to be closing in on our merchant convoy in the bight." "Pirates?" Jon asked curiously as he sat next to Harry on a chair. "Don't know," Harry shrugged. "It could be just other merchant ships. We'll know soon enough." "Have you reached out to the captain escorting the merchant convoy?" Jon asked. "No," said Harry. He conjured another glass on the table and poured wine into it before offering it to Jon. "Thank you," Jon said while taking the glass. "Why aren't you contacting them?" "Why would I? They know 2 ships are approaching the convoy just like we do. What they do now is in their hands. I can't make daily decisions for them, so why step in now?" Harry said with a shrug. Jon didn't deign to bring up the issue, and instead watched the projected view of the map. They watched the escort ships move in to intercept, and almost immediately, one of the approaching ships disappeared from the map. "Pirates," said Jon. "It seems so," Harry nodded with a frown while sipping the wine. "But look at the second ship. It's turning away," Jon pointed out. Suddenly, the second ship also disappeared from the map. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," Harry said with no remorse whatsoever. Pirates were useless wastes of space in his eyes. They created nothing on their own, and contributed only blood, death, and tears to the world. In his opinion, one dead pirate made the world a whole lot better. He hoped escort ships killed them all, and left no survivors. "A raven came from Sunspear," Jon suddenly said, gaining Harry's attention. "Oh, what does Lord Doran have to say?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Jon flourished a piece of parchment and held it out to him. When Harry looked at it, the seal remained intact. "Master Marwyn thought it best not to break the seal," said Jon. Harry grunted and broke the seal off before reading the contents of the parchment. Once he read it, he leaned back in his seat and frowned. "What is it?" Jon asked curiously. "It seemed Prince Oberyn and Nymeria are once again to be our honored guests," said Harry with a thoughtful frown. "Prince Oberyn and Lady Nymeria?" Jon said, craning his neck to look curiously at Harry. "Father sent a raven to Sunspear accepting their offer of betrothal," said Harry. "He did?" Jon's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes," Harry nodded. He took his legs off the table and stood up before approaching the window by the tower. Looking out into the sea, he saw ships from across the narrow sea anchoring at his harbor. It had only been a month since the canal's opening, and the fruits of that labor were evident for all to see. Avalon was bustling with activity as more and more merchants across the narrow sea from the Vale of Arryn and even King's Landing came for trade. As he had expected, the eastern parts of the Seven Kingdoms were taking the canal to access Avalon for trade. Some of his own people had expressed doubt about whether merchants would depend on the tremulous sea for trade when they had land access. But Harry's prediction proved to be true. It was true that merchants in the Seven Kingdoms depended primarily on roads for trade. It was true within the north that merchants would rely on roads to reach their destinations, but that was not the case for merchants from other kingdoms that came into the north. The neck was only passable when there was no rain in the region. Even without rain, it was difficult. But with rain, the King's Road would go under water and mud, making it near impossible for carts to traverse the swampy terrain safely. Only the Riverland and northern merchants knew when to take the King's Road into the north. Most others used White Harbor to sell their wares in the north. He knew this far better when he started trading using his fleet with the western shores of Westeros. The volume of trade had quadrupled even in Winterfell. He knew this because Maester Luwin kept impeccable records on such matters. A good portion of those revenues was propped up by the visiting maesters and novices from the Citadel to study in the astronomy tower. But all of this was not enough. He had to set plans in motion within the north before Dorne became a factor. "You look tensed. What's going on?" Jon asked, joining Harry by the window. "We need to visit the mountain clans to discuss some important matters," said Harry. "But before that, there is something I must tell you." Harry saw the intuitive look on Jon's face. He braced himself for the contentious conversation they were about to have. Harry eyed his brother, who was brooding on his lonesome against the railing of the airship. The Liberator sailed through the sky, carrying them to the westernmost cliffs of Sea Dragon Point. "Your brother seems to be in a bad mood," Rhaenyra commented. Harry looked at her from the corner of his eye before sighing. He turned away from Jon, who was in his entirely expected brooding, and gave him the silent treatment ever since he came forth with the young Griff's true identity. "Entirely my fault," Harry said as he closed the curtains on the captain's cabin. "What did you do?" Rhaenyra asked as she pressed herself against his chest, with her head resting on his chest while looking into his eyes with her vivid amethyst eyes. "Just told a secret I was keeping from him," Harry muttered, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Must be some secret to have shaken him so," Rhaenyra said. Harry grunted. "He's being overly dramatic. In time, he'll come around." Rhaenyra murmured as she pressed a kiss against his neck. "I'm wondering why you insisted I come to this faraway cliff. I hope you don't plan to abandon me there." "I was led to understand that you wanted to become a Valkyrie," Harry said. "I do. I'm trained to take over the post for Kyla now that she is leaving the group," said Rhaenyra. Kyla's impending marriage has opened her spot, but are you ready to take up her responsibilities?" "I am," Rhaenyra said confidently. "Guarding you should be the easiest job. Gods and demons run away from you in fear for their lives." Harry snorted when he heard his prowess being described as such. "I should be so lucky to have gods and demons run away. It'd make my life a whole lot easier," said Harry. He took hold of Rhaenyra's shoulders and slightly pushed her away from his body to look into her eyes. "Kyla's post is not a simple post, and you've barely even started to learn the magical disciplines. But most importantly," Harry picked up the electric blue bow on the counter and showed it to Adala. "This was Kyla's bow. It harnesses the power of the sky. In the right hands, it could prove to be a lethal weapon." "Really? Rhaenyra reached out with her hand to take it, but he held it out of her reach. "Not yet," he admonished, holding the bow away from her reach. "First, you must prove your competence in at least one of the disciplines of magic to even be considered for receiving this bow. Then, you need to earn my trust." "I suppose I have the trust part on my side. After all, if you didn't trust me, you wouldn't have allowed me into your bed," Rhaenyra said, smiling coyly at him. "Do not depend on my favor too much. If your skill is not up to par, I'll have no choice but to seek another candidate for the lightning bow," Harry cautioned while securing the bow in a cabinet in the quarters. "What skills does my lord seek from his lightning bow holder? Surely, this poor slave girl could be of much better service than its previous holder." Rhaenyra smirked as she pushed Harry against the wall of the captain's cabin, her nails digging into the skin of his shoulders. Harry snorted at her antics, but he acquiesced by pulling her against him and kissing her on her lips. "Am I now worthy of the bow?" Rhaenyra asked breathlessly, with a wide smile. "You are quite the woman, Rhaenyra." Harry chuckled as she pouted. "But the bow requires more than that. I suppose I'll have to work hard to master the runes and other disciplines of magic," Rhaenyra said. "Yes, and that's why I brought you here. You'll need to be properly trained in a school away from the distractions of Avalon," Harry said with a pointed look, making her giggle. "A school here?" Rhaenyra asked curiously. "Yes." "Are you sure you're not sending me away because of your Dornish lover's arrival?" Rhaenyra asked. "If Nymeria knew about us, she'd be more excited to meet you rather than take any offense," Harry said with a snort. "And yet, you never told them about us." Rhaenyra said with a grin, "I suppose you trust me more than Nymeria or Arianne." "That I do. Why else would I allow you to become a Valkyrie?" "So, this school that you were talking about, what is it?" Rhaenyra asked curiously while her fingers threaded through his hair. "It's not built yet," said Harry. "You must be joking!" Rhaenyra stared at him, unimpressed. You'll see, he said enigmatically. Still brooding? Harry asked while joining Jon by the Liberator's port side. The wind swept his hair back as he stood near the railing, but he enjoyed the view below. The Liberator was among the clouds, sailing almost serenely, as if they were being carried away by a gentle wind. Why didn't you tell me about Aegon before? Jon asked. I wasn't sure he was Aegon Targaryen. As a matter of fact, I still don't know whether he is Rhaegar's son or a fake. You could have told me, Jon muttered. If I told you, then what? You think you'll march in with your let's be brothers attitude, and expect Aegon Targaryen to hug you and ride off into the sunset with brotherhood and friendship that lasts till the end of times. Harry asked with such brutal honesty that it pushed Jon into shock. Whoa! Oh! I didn't think. You didn't think, said Harry, pointing a finger at his brother. That's true. Are you trying to make me angry? Jon growled, glaring at him with anger. If you are, it's working. I am. You should be angry because I am, Harry said. What makes you think Aegon Targaryen is your brother? Did he make jokes with you, laugh with you, care for you in ways that Robb or I ever did? No, but then he is not your brother in any way. If blood was all that mattered, you should be calling me cousin, and you should be calling the Lord of Winterfell uncle. But I am your brother, and Lord Stark is your father. Aegon Targaryen is your brother, as much as Theon Greyjoy is your best friend. That's not. Jon started looking incensed. Oh, Harry said, raising a finger. In your misplaced anger, you seem to be missing a point. We still don't know if he is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and if he is, what do you think he is after right now? The Iron Throne. Jon muttered with a conflicted look on his face. So, before you become all moody and broody, I hope you understand why I didn't immediately tell you when I found out. It took me some time to ponder the greater impact of this knowledge before sharing it with you, said Harry. Besides, I was trying to work out if he was really Rhaegar's son. Is he? Rhaegar's son? Jon asked hesitantly. I honestly don't know, Harry admitted with a shake of his head. Blood magic is tricky to discern. If I had a blood sample of Ea Martell or Rhaegar, it'd have been possible to trace that ancestry. As of now, I can only tell whether he carries Targaryen blood. Does he? Yes, he does. Harry took a deep breath before nodding. His blood has properties similar to Maester Aemia's and your blood, but it is not indicative that he is Rhaegar's son. But if he has Targaryen blood, then, Jon said with a frown. What does that mean? It means just that. He is a dragon seed. Harry shrugged. If he is anything more, we need to know that from those who supposedly spirited him out of King's Landing during the rebellion. I guess that's reasonable, Jon muttered, letting out a sigh. Enough dallying. Harry patted his brother's shoulder before nodding at their destination. We're finally here. It was the same cliff overlooking the Sunset Sea where the ancient sea dragon was buried. What are we doing here? Jon asked curiously. Do you want to see a magic trick? Harry asked with a grin. Yes. Then watch closely, said Harry. He fished out a runestone and banished it away from his palm with a flick of his wrist. The runestone soared through the sky and fell on the cliff with force. A rumbling suddenly started to be heard, as if stones were grinding against each other. There was a massive disturbance in the area. The wind started blowing fast, the ground shook, and the sea became slightly agitated. Everyone on the Liberator came to watch the spectacle happening in the distance. Right before their eyes, the rocky cliff slowly turned into a mighty huge monolith castle that looked like it had been carved into the cliff. A castle? Jon asked with a frown. A castle that serves as a school of magic for everyone to learn, built by the most advanced transfiguration spell contained in the form of a runestone, said Harry, feeling quite happy. It's complete with doors and roofs, Jon said in awe. The details are intricate, far better than Avalon. I've had time to improve upon the magic I used for Avalon. A little bit of alchemy and enchantments made it perfect. So what do you think? Marvelous, said Jon, staring at the castle with an impressed look. What do you want to call it? Harrion's Mighty School of Magic, Harry said proudly, wiping the smile on Jon's face. That's a terrible name, Jon deadpanned. Then how about Harrion's Extraordinary School of Magic? Jon scoffed and shook his head before walking away from the deck of the Liberator, muttering under his breath about some inane things. What? Those are wonderful names, Harry shouted. He smiled fondly after his brother. At least he managed to chase away the broodiness in his brother. He felt the chill of the northern mountains in his bones as he stood among the many as a witness to the marriage ceremony of Kyla and her husband, Windhor. Some of the mountains he could see were covered in snow, painting them in white. The hill he was currently standing on was not so different. The trees around him were covered in snow. For some odd reason, the different clans living in the northern mountains considered this particular mountain sacred grounds. On this mountain, no bloodshed was allowed, and conflict was prohibited by all magners of the clans. Anyone breaking this law was permanently banished from the northern mountains, regardless of their status or position within their clan. The families of the groom and bride stood watch as the bride was given flowers while the groom was gifted the pelt of a shadow cat. Then the bride was given honey by the groom's family before the groom kissed the bride. As the old gods as witness, I now pronounce Kyla and Windsor of the Little clan. Thorin the Little proclaimed, just like that, Kyla was now a married woman. You know, I heard rumors that the clansmen still practice the first night. A Lyanna whispered from behind him. That practice has been outlawed for centuries, Jon said fiercely. I'm sure all sorts of things are outlawed in the Seven Kingdoms. Rhaenyra rolled her eyes. You should hear your small folk talk. There are all kinds of rumors going around. How else does a Tyrosi girl know of such things? Jon looked helplessly at him, but Harry shrugged his shoulders. Who spreads such vile rumors? Jon asked, turning his sights on Rhaenyra. What if they're not rumors? Rhaenyra asked with a playful wink. If you ask nicely, maybe you could experience this first night. Harry didn't know whether Jon's face reddened because of anger or embarrassment. It was probably both, but seeing his brother look like a tomato was fun. Enough poking fun at my brother for the day. Leave him be. Rhaenyra, said Harry. As my lord commands, Rhaenyra curtsied before joining Kyla's side to partake in the moderate celebrations organized for the bride and groom. Was she serious? Jon asked once they were alone. Probably, Harry said with a thoughtful look. People are easily corruptible. It only takes a moment of weakness to turn even the most disciplined to act in the cruelest ways. We should do, Jon started. Nothing, Harry said, pinning his brother with an unimpressed stare. If you haven't noticed it yet, the mountain clans show us their respect as a courtesy. Their true allegiance lies with the Lord of Winterfell. I'd suggest that you think twice before you set off a hive of bees on us over hearsay. We do nothing when something wrong is happening just because they are loyal to our family, Jon asked incredulously. No, of course not. First, find those spreading the rumor and confirm it's authentic. Then, gather evidence about the specifics, like who and when, before presenting it to the Lord of Winterfell to make his judgment, said Harry. Sounds like a lot of work, Jon muttered. It is, and you'll not act rashly by accusing any one of the clans. They're incredibly proud, and we're guests here. So, keep that in mind. Thankfully, Jon was not headstrong enough to make a scene at the mountain, but Harry found it odd that he never heard any of these rumors. He doubted Abshera's making that up just to rile up Jon. He considered himself a good read of character, and therefore, he knew Rhaenyra would never make up such a severe accusation for any reason. At the same time, none of his Valkyrie guards had ever spoken of such practices in the mountains. He was not naive enough to think a feudal society like the North didn't have its share of evils. The subpar living conditions of the small folk were well known to him. In most parts of Westeros, they weren't even allowed to own land and lived in abject poverty. It was even a common occurrence for the small folk to go hungry during winter and die of starvation. Avalon and Winterfell no longer experienced such incidences because of his intervention, but that was not the case everywhere. Perhaps I should look into spreading the reach of my spies into the remote spaces of the North instead of merely concentrating on regional rivals and foreign enemies. Harry mused. He shouldn't be doing anything of the sort, as it was not his job to oversee the laws being applied in the North. It was his father's job. Unfortunately, spying was never a viable policy his father pursued, preferring instead to rely on the good character of his lords. Harry kept such thoughts to the back of his mind while he invited the clansmen for a meeting. Kyla was not important enough for the lords of the Northern Mountains to attend, but he had invited them, and they answered his summons. If they were displeased to attend a small folk wedding, they didn't show it. Even if the clansmen were more tribal in their lifestyle compared to the rest of the Northerners, their clan heads lived in castles and keep. They were lords of their respective clans, and Winterfell recognized them as such. They were not like the raiders of the mountain clans of the Vale. That was why he invited them over into his airship and held their meeting in the sky. The 36 lords of the mountain clans were sufficiently impressed and happy to be flying on his airship. He also didn't spare any expense in throwing a feast for their sake. It was couched as a wedding feast to celebrate Kyla's nuptial. Wine and ale flowed aplenty in the feast. It was also rich in delicacies like oat cakes, lemon cakes, salmon, and most notably a wild boar they slew while trekking the mountains. Harry considered himself lucky enough to have the presence of mind to travel with his best cooks, because he couldn't help but hum in appreciation as he tasted the finely roasted meat. The clansmen were quite the experts in hospitality, and they showed it whenever he visited their keeps high in the mountains or even in the valleys. So returning the favor was the least he could do. I have to say, it is quite surprising to see this kind of revelry being made for a commoner's wedding. Lord Nori commented after the bride and groom were out of their earshot. Indeed, Kyla is not my family, but she is blessed by the gods with magic in her blood. Being a Valkyrie means to be a handmaiden to the old gods and serve as a vessel to their power in this land, Harry said, eyeing the old lord of the clan who controlled the lands close to the gift. I hope you understand why I give her the respect she deserves. Of course, my lord. The old gods are held sacred in our lands. I meant no disrespect. Lord Brandon Nori rushed to say. Harry suppressed the urge to smile. It was one of his clever tricks to couch the magical abilities of people as the blessing of the old gods. It was a load of bullshit, of course. Those ancient beings or spirits that ran around in the weirwood trees could care less about humans or magic so long as it didn't affect them. But the clansman didn't need to know any of that because he had an agenda of his own. Kyla may no longer serve as a Valkyrie, but her gifts from the gods won't be in vain. I have started a school in Sea Dragon Point for those blessed with the gift from the gods and those who wish to learn it. Harry casually mentioned the school, which piqued the interest of almost everyone in his hearing range. A school, you say, my lord? Do you mean to tell us that magic could be taught to everyone? Lord Hugo Wall asked curiously. For those with the right temperament, yes, said Harry. Magic is a force in nature made by the gods. Those who stay close to the gods and nature tend to have the proclivity to host magic in their souls. He noticed he had captured the interest of almost everyone at the table. I'm sure there are many amongst the clansmen, perhaps even in your immediate family, blessed by the gods, he added slyly, looking all men in the eye. Their gifts could be nurtured in my school. I'm planning to impart my knowledge through Kyla and the other Valkyrie. But we don't know who has the gift from the gods, Lord Harry, said Lord Hugo. That can be easily solved. I'll have the Valkyrie send with the means to identify those with the blessing of the old gods, said Harry. While there was no way he could replicate the stellar performance of Ravenclaw in creating a self-updating registry owing to the raw form of magic in Westeros, he had other nuanced methods to identify those with magic. Runes were explicitly designed to tame the raw, chaotic magic to make it more malleable. Therefore, his solution to identify those with magic was also based on runes. But this was not the contentious issue that he wanted the cooperation of the mountain clans. That particular problem was with the extension of the Wolfswood Road from Deepwood Motte through the Nori lands, crossing into the Gift. Harry only broached that subject after he saw the positive response from the clansmen regarding his magic school. Thankfully, he only wanted the consensus from the Noris and Wolves. Fortune further smiled upon him when the two were more than willing to come with him and chart the lands through which the extended road from Glover lands would pass. Harry hugged close to the tree and settled himself on the tree branch with a good vantage point on the trap laid on the ground. The crows cawed from their abode, and a gentle breeze ruffled the leaves. Otherwise, the forest was quiet. Suddenly, his ears picked up the rustle of leaves, making him look around until his eyes fell on a patch of thick black fur hiding amongst the bushes on the ground. He slowly placed the arrow on his bow and pulled it back against the string. But Harry didn't release the arrow at the Shadowcat. Instead, he waited patiently for the Shadowcat to make its move on the cooked boar meat he was using as bait. The Shadowcats were fearsome hunters with incredible senses, making them a terror in the mountains and forests. Their presence was particularly troublesome in Sea Dragon Point, and he had received many complaints from the people. With the construction of his school, it became imperative that the roads become safer, as there was much work to be done around the school and the surrounding lands, but people couldn't move so freely if bears and Shadowcats attacked them. So, he decided to cull the numbers of the Shadowcats and other predators in the region close to his school. In time, he hoped a village or town would crop up around his school. The area was rich in marble and his surveyors had found a silver vein not too far away from the school. So, the place would become attractive as there was no shortage of work. If nothing else, the area was ripe with trees and bears. Wood and pelts remained a lucrative trade market in the north, so there was no trouble in making a living for the settlers near the western cliffs of Sea Dragon Point. The Shadowcat finally decided the coast was clear and took careful steps out of its hiding spot. Its bright yellow eyes trained on the meat as it walked gracefully, its tail swishing behind. Harry slowly adjusted his bow without making a sound and aimed the arrow at the predator closing in on the bait. He breathed in and held his breath as he took aim and released the arrow while breathing out. His aim was spot on. The arrow punched through the head of the Shadowcat. The creature didn't even see the arrow coming, and it fell dead on the spot. Phew! Harry let out a relieved sigh. I still have a grip on my aim. He slung the bow on his back and climbed down from the pine tree to collect the bounty. With a flick of his wrist, he levitated the Shadowcat and walked away from the area with his bounty hovering by his side. When he finally came to the clearing where the rest of the hunting party was gathered, he was immediately greeted by an excitable Fenris. His trusted direwolf companion howled happily and ran circles around him, while a bleeding Shadowcat followed him, floating by his side. "My lord, good hunt!" said Shellispool, riding towards him atop his horse. "Quite the good hunt, yes. What did Lord Brandon and Hugo get?" Harry asked, nodding at the two heads of the mountain clans in the distance. "They fell a wild bull with their spear, my lord." "Good, so, what are they arguing about?" Harry asked as the men came along and strapped his kill to a wagon and carried it away into the camp. "They're currently arguing who put it down first," said Solos. "Of course," Harry scoffed, shaking his head. "Where is John?" Harry asked. "With Adela and Kyla. They're helping move the furniture into the school." He hummed noncommittally while idly scratching behind the ears of Fenris, earning a soft purr from the black wolf. "I suppose we have time for another hunt. What do you say, Fenris? Do you want to tag along?" Fenris let out a howl and happily rubbed his nose against Harry's leg. "All right then," Harry chuckled. He invited Lords Norzier and Wool for another hunt. But just before he went to the hunt, John came to him with an interesting piece of information. "We received word from Captain Nimpton. Our ships were attacked by the Sistermen. Captain Nimpton captured the attacking vessel and took the men prisoners," said John while Harry was adjusting himself on his horse, while holding a spear in his hand. "That's good," Harry said, but he noticed that his brother looked worried. "What?" "Captain Nimpton reports it was not just lowly pirates he captured. Among the prisoners, there was Edmund Torrent, nephew of Lord Yaxendor Torrent of Little Sister," John said with a grim look. "Huh, that's interesting." Harry frowned briefly before shrugging his shoulders. "Is the prisoner being transported to Avalon? If you wish so, it could be done. But should we bring him? This'll threaten peace in the region." John reminded him. "The Sistermen broke peace when they attacked our ships. Now let them suffer the consequences of challenging the North." Varys couldn't be more happy these days. He had thought that it had become increasingly difficult to pit the kingdoms against each other with Robert's death. The initial days of Stannis' rule confirmed his fears. The Baratheon dynasty emerged from the war with the Lannister rebellion stronger than ever. All their debt was wiped out with Lannister gold, while the Lannister invasion into the Reach weakened the principal house of the Reach. Most of the North March region was ravaged by war and suffered crop loss due to flooding from the broken dams. The eastern parts of the Reach were littered with burnt fields, towns, and villages. The Crownlands were also not spared from the depravities of war. Many good men and knights of the Crownlands lost their lives. At least he had managed to keep the loyalists of Cracklaw Point out of harm's way. He had intentionally sabotaged their preparedness and kept them out of any major conflicts to preserve their strength for the right time. By some stroke of luck and pragmatic thinking on the part of Hoster Tully, the Riverlands remained intact throughout the war. It was one of the miracles in the war, as it was the first time the Riverlands remained untouched in a major conflict in Westeros. In fact, the Tullys came out stronger with the Riverlands intact, gaining the reviewed allegiance of the Riverlords and ties to House Lefford. The Stormlands had also remained intact despite the war, which was a shame. The Dornish could find themselves in a difficult fight once they raised their banners for the rightful king. The Vale remained strong and united behind House Aaron, but various new cracks were forming in that place. The Iron Islands were no longer a factor after Harry and Stark crushed them in the seas. Even now, the Ironborn were getting suffocated by the Starks. It was pretty clear what Harry and Stark was doing. The Ironborn could possibly end up wiped out in his lifetime, and Varys found that prospect exceptionally welcoming even if the North would end up expanding their strength in the Sunset Sea. The less said about the North, the better. The North had risen leaps and bounds in economic and martial power out of all the kingdoms. House Stark, in particular, had accumulated power, wealth, and prestige, the likes of which Tywin Lannister couldn't even dream. They were so strong that it worried him a little until his little birds confirmed the rumors coming from Sunspear. The Starks had accepted the betrothal between Haryon Stark and Princess Arianne. It was one of the best news that came his way, as the work to keep the North out of the coming war became all the more simpler. But that alone didn't give him comfort. There were other reasons why he was feeling joy today. For some time now, he had known Petyr Baelish had been facilitating the Marish pirates and the Sistermen to attack White Harbor's shipping through the Bight, but that little plan was on the cusp of blowing up in Baelish's face. He had so far kept his distance precisely for this moment. He knew that one day, Beatrice's little friends and the Three Sisters would make a mistake, and he could freely expose Beatrice without anyone doubting his involvement. If he were really lucky, this would devolve into a much greater conflict between the North and the Vale. It couldn't have come at a better time either, because Stannis was facing some issues with the Faith. There were calls by several elements of the Faith in the Crownlands clamoring for the restoration of the Great Sept on Visenia's Hill. It was also now an open knowledge that the Queen had abandoned the Seven in favor of the old gods. It was not at all difficult to spread the rumor that Stannis had done the same. Every misfortune was blamed on the king abandoning the true faith. He made sure of it. So, he happily welcomed this latest conflict brewing between the North and the Sistermen. Now, he just had to nudge certain things along for Jon Arryn's efforts to be in vain. He felt a twinge of discomfort for what he was about to do for the sake of his king. But it was necessary. A stag could never keep the kingdoms together. It was the duty of the dragon to keep the seven kingdoms as one. Only King Aegon VI would accomplish that task. So Varys breezily walked into the chamber of the Hand. "My Lord Arryn, there has been an incident with the Sistermen," he said, schooling his face to present a grave and concerned expression. Jon Arryn let out a long-suffering sigh and collapsed into his chair. "What have they done?" Edmund Torrent was in deep shit. He knew that the moment his ship was sunken and his crew taken prisoners by the accursed Northmen, his uncle would no doubt be mad that he got caught by the Northmen. On the other hand, his father would be mad to learn what he was doing in the seas in the first place. The same could be said about his mother and elder brother. Ever since his father had a falling out with his uncle over some issue, he was actively discouraged from consorting with his uncle, Lord Yaxandor, the Lord of Little Sister. He'd have been content to do so if it wasn't for the fact that his father was dirt poor. Despite being a scion of House Torrent, his father contended to lead the life of a fisherman. What his father was doing was madness in Edmund's eyes. He was not satisfied living the rest of his life in the odorous shithole of the Red Pebble shore with his father and his fisherman friends. He thought his life would be better in the halls of Torrent Keep with his uncle. He was welcomed into his uncle's home quite warmly. He was even given a post aboard one of his uncle's ships to prove his worth. The first few years were quite enjoyable as part of the crew of the Lady Wave. He had proven his worth in the sea by whaling in the deep seas and journeying as far as Braavos and Gulltown on many voyages. But that good life came to an end when his uncle decided to consort with Myrish Selzels. The Northmen were not held in great regard in the islands, but the Sistermen had no conflict with them in recent decades, especially with the Manderleys. At first, his uncle had only hosted the Myrish Selzels in Little Sister. His uncle wasn't the only one to do so, which made him realize the futility of protesting. He also knew his uncle had broad support from the Vale for some reason. The Myrish Selzels were not only based on the Three Sisters, but also on scattered secret ports of the Fingers. Initially, there was much profit in hosting the Myrish Selzels. Silver flowed like a river into the islands. The captured Manderley ships proved to be quite profitable when they sold their wares into the Essosi markets. But then Haryon Stark turned Myr to the ground, which shook every major lord of the Three Sisters. The Myrish pirates were also scared out of their wits, but there were also quite a few hotheads amongst them who wanted to attack the Starks. Edmund knew then those Sals were morons. How were they supposed to attack the Starks? Winterfell was nowhere near the sea, and Avalon was on the other side of the continent. It was another one of those instances where he realized he was surrounded by madmen. By then, the Manderleys had started providing their merchant ships with escorts, which changed everything. It became increasingly difficult to attack northern ships. Then the most miraculous news came from the north about a canal being cut across the neck connecting the bit with the Blazewater Bay. Once again, Edmund only got the feeling of danger from the north, while his crazy uncle and his pirate friends were planning an attack through the newly cut canal. This stupid plan was concocted even though the Stark fleet from Avalon had been wreaking havoc on the pirates in the open seas. So, it was unsurprising for the ships carrying sistermen and pirates to start being lost in the sea soon after the canal opened. The Bite and the Narrow Sea were crawling with the Stark fleet. Now, he had first-hand experience of why the Stark fleet was laying waste on their ships and the Mirish pirates in the sea. He had seen with his own eyes the sheer power of the Stark fleet. Not only were the Black Wolf ships faster, but they were also hosting some kind of weapon capable of making enemy ships explode. His own ship had its main mast destroyed by the exploding weapon of the Stark fleet. The Stark fleet sank the pirate ships that accompanied his ship. The crossbowmen of the Stark fleet killed any survivors aboard those ships without mercy. Edmund had feared the same would happen to him and the sailors in his ship, but they were hauled off by the Stark fleet from the sea and taken prisoners. He supposed he ought to thank the heraldry of House Torrent for his survival. The enemy captain most likely saw the torrent of water on a yellow field and deduced it was the ship of House Torrent. But now Edmund didn't know what was in store for him. He had seen Avalon when he was hauled off from the ship into the vast harbor of the enemy's lair. He had seen ships upon ships as far as his eyes could see. The towering castle of the Sorcerer of the North was also an intimidating sight, but the most damning of all was the solitary imprisonment he was facing. Since landing on Avalon, no one had said a word to him. He was not allowed to talk or see his fellow sistermen sailors. In fact, he had no idea whether his men were alive or not. Edmund winced as his stomach growled in protest. He hadn't been fed for days or perhaps weeks. He had no idea how many days passed since he was thrown into the dark cells of Avalon's dungeons. He was only given water, and that too sparingly. The accursed Northerners were starving him to death, which made him fear for the fates of his men. If he, a scion of House Torrent, were treated this way, his fellow sailors would most likely be treated far worse. Or maybe they're not suffering because they're already dead, Edmund thought grimly. Such thought made him depressed, and he worried for his father and younger brother on the island. No doubt they would have heard what happened, or his uncle covered that up as well. Suddenly, his ears picked up on the sound of the locks being turned from the darkened corridor. Edmund immediately rushed to the steel bars that kept him prisoner in his cell, and stared in the direction where he thought he heard the sound. At first, there was nothing but darkness that greeted his eyes. He became disillusioned again and thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But then, a brilliant white light filled the dark dungeons, forcing Edmund to shield his eyes. Then he heard footsteps that made him stand back from the bars in fright. The light thankfully dimmed somewhat, and he could only gape at what he saw. Before him was a globe of light floating outside the iron bars of his cell. "I must be going insane," Edmund whispered hoarsely. "You're not insane, at least not yet." A voice suddenly came from the corridor, making Edmund crane his neck and squint his eyes. Footsteps echoed through the otherwise silent corridor, making Edmund gulp nervously. Finally, the footsteps stopped, and a young lad with dark gray eyes and curly hair as black as night stood before him. Hurrying Stark, Edmund muttered fearfully and took a few steps back in fright. He had heard many stories of the North Sorcerer. Rumors claimed the sorcerer loved bloodshed and sacrificed his enemies to the queer gods of the First Men. There were songs sung across the narrow sea about the Ironborn being strung up in the weirwood trees with their entrails out for the crows to feast. While he wasn't one to blindly trust the word of sailors, he knew the Stark boy was a dangerous foe. Anyone who could burn one of the free cities to the ground and cut a giant canal overnight was one to be feared. Fortunately for you, I'm not my brother. I am Jon Stark. If you value your life, you'll tell me everything you know about the Sistermen and their collusion with Marish pirates. What will happen to me? Edmund asked with a shiver as he saw those cold gray eyes staring into his soul like a hungry wolf. If I were you, I'd be worried about what will happen to you if you don't tell us what you know, Jon said with a cold stare. Right now, Edmund flinched as it got further uncomfortable, and his eyes fell on the globe of light and then at the wolf standing before his cell. He hadn't even met the infamous Black Wolf, and his knees were already shaking. His thoughts went to his father, who threw away his life of comfort to live an honest life. Looking back, he could see why his father decided to lead a simplistic life amongst the fishermen. Taking a deep breath, he decided to speak the truth in the hopes that he'd live to see his family again. Harry stood in what he liked to call the war room of Avalon, and the full map of the Bight flared up before him on the table. His fleet was present in the Bight only because of pirate activity in the region. But those ships were in transit, escorting merchant ships to the Sunset Canal. They were not primed for an invasion of the Three Sisters. For now, those ships were based out of White Harbor and the islands of Blazewater Bay. But a complete invasion of the Three Sisters was also risky. Harry knew he could not launch an invasion of those islands without the express permission of his father and the king. The islands were part of the Vale of Arryn, even if they were ruled by House Sunderland. The Sistermen had often rebelled against the Vale, but they still remained sworn to House Arryn. But his plan didn't revolve around just invading the Sistermen. He didn't have the men to hold those islands anyway. All he had to do was destroy their ports and burn their ships to knock those idiots out of the way and keep the Bight free of their miserable existence. Harry had a justifiable reason to attack the islands on account of pirate presence, but he needed proof beyond doubt of the Sistermen's collusion with the Marish pirates. Already there was pressure from King's Landing for peace and promises from Lord Arryn to deal with the Sistermen. He knew a hollow promise when he heard one. Besides, he and the Manderleys had been extremely generous by never attacking the Sistermen despite their thieving ways all these years. Although he knew Lord Arryn had only nominal control over the Sistermen's actions, he had given the man more than enough time to rein them in. But now, it was time to take matters into his own hands. Looking at the map of the Tree Sisters on the table, he wished the North had a larger population like the Reach. If he had more people, he would have confidently marched in with his army and forcibly assimilated the islands with a stronger immigrant northern population cropping up. Unfortunately, he knew from the experience of Black Tide that such a plan would not work. The struggle of finding enough people in the north to settle in Black Tide was a challenge. Then came the challenge of finding the right livelihood and homes for those people, which became an issue. He was forced to abandon that particular project when he realized how unrealistic it was. On paper, the plan to fill the island with honest Northmen sounded brilliant, but practicality on the ground was another thing. Therefore, he was intent on not repeating the same mistake. Harry suddenly looked up when the door to his war room swung open and John walked in. "It's done," said John. Harry raised an eyebrow, looking expectantly at his brother. "Edmund Torrent is helping us to mark the spots of pirates' safe havens in the Three Sisters," said John. "I see," Harry grinned, nodding at his brother's success. "You have done well." At first, Harry hesitated to send John to do the interrogation. While John was not that taken by the notions of chivalry and honor, there were still some misplaced notions of a knight in his brother's mind. But it seemed his worries were for nothing. John was fitting in quite nicely into his role. "There is one other thing," John said, piquing Harry's curiosity. "Edmund Torrent believes Lord Petyr Baelish of the Fingers is involved in bringing Marish pirates into the islands. He says Lord Baelish provides sanctuary to some cells that harass northern shipping in the Narrow Sea." "You trust the words of Edmund Torrent?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Honestly, he was not that surprised to learn the Andalweasel he met at the capital after the Ironborn rebellion had a hand in this mess. That man was one twisted rascal. He had only allowed the man to breathe a second more because the man would sow more chaos in the capital. "I do. He seems genuine, and he is already helping our men out markers on the maps of the islands and the Fingers to find the pirate havens," said John. "What if our prisoner is intentionally deceiving us? After all, Lord Baxley is a bannerman of Lord Arryn and serves as the master of coin in Stannis Baratheon's small council," Harry pointed out, curious to see what his brother had to say. "Are you saying House Torrent is intentionally trying to start a war between the Vale and the North by falsely implicating a prominent Vale lord?" John asked with a frown. "I'm not, but it is a valid concern, is it not?" Harry said. "Whoever started this plan wanted the North to embroil in a war with the Vale. After all, the Three Sisters are a territory of the Vale. Any attack on the islands is an attack on the Vale of Arryn." "So, what do you mean to do?" John asked awkwardly as the silence stretched on for a while. "What do you think we should do?" Harry turned that question around, making his brother squirm. "I'm not a lord," John started, but Harry cut him off before he could weasel out. "You'll soon be one once Moat Cailin is finished. So, tell me, future Lord of the Neck, what do you think we should do?" Harry asked, putting his brother on the spot. He saw Jon go into thought for a few minutes. My gut tells me Edmund Torrent is telling the truth. We present him before Lord Stark can present the facts as we know it. Then we ask permission to rout these pirates from the Three Sisters and the Fingers. We capture the lords responsible and bring them before the Iron Throne with irrefutable proof, said Jon, his voice becoming confident with each word. What if our father doesn't want a war to break out and order us to ignore your findings and Edmund Torrent's confession? Harry asked, stumping Jon, who looked worried for a moment. Then we seek like-minded allies to convince our father otherwise, Jon said with a sudden spark of confidence. We shall seek Lord Manderley's aid and present our findings with a united front. Not a bad idea, Harry admitted after giving it some thought. Jon was also happy that his suggestion was taken seriously, but that happiness was short-lived upon the following words that came from Harry. So, what is the strategy that you recommend to attack the Three Sisters and the Fingers without spilling into an outright war with the Vale? Harry asked, staring expectantly at Jon. What? Jon spluttered. Strategy? I have no experience in such things. This is how you become experienced. Like Rob and I, you've taken lessons from Maester Luwin and Marwyn. You're ready, said Harry. He picked up a newly forged sword, sheathed in a scabbard, and presented it to Jon. What is this? A new sword made of Valyrian steel. You'll find it'll complement your magical power, Harry said cryptically, handing over the sword to his brother. Jon unsheathed the sword, making the blade sing as it cut through the air. Harry immediately conjured a block of ice and banished it at Jon. Surprised by his abrupt attack, Jon placed the sword against the ice as if to bat it away. A magical shield sprung up around Jon in a protective cocoon. The ice block smashed harmlessly against the shield, turning it into vapor in an instant. That's one little trick. Harry patted his brother's shoulder as he made to walk out of the war room. I'm sure you'll find the rest in due time. Wait! How am I supposed to find a strategy to attack the Vale without causing a war? Jon shouted, I'm sure your brilliant mind can find some way. You may seek aid from the captains of the fleet and anyone you trust. Harry shouted back before making himself scarce from his brother's company. Arianne was wroth with her father for playing his stupid games with her. She had believed naively that her father had stopped messing with her life after her betrothal with Hirian was accepted. It seemed her father had no intention of keeping her confined to Sunspear like a prisoner without any agency to herself. The latest bit of game from her father was by sending off Oberyn and Nymeria to the north, while she was forced to stay back for some inane reason. Her father dreamed up. This was done after she was asked to prepare to visit the north with Oberyn and Nymeria. Arianne tried her best to make her father see the reason and let her travel with her uncle and cousin. But her father remained adamant that she stay in Sunspear. She had watched the ship carrying her uncle and Nymeria sail away from Sunspear a few days back. From that day onwards, she ceased uttering a word to her father and confined herself to her chambers. All her plans to spend some time in the north and see all the marvels of the distant land of her betrothed lay in tatters. So she couldn't find it in her heart to care a whit what her father wanted to say. But now, she was forced to approach her father because he had his guards escort her to his solar. Take a seat, daughter, said Doran. Arianne huffed and sat on a chair while the guards stood behind her. To her immense displeasure, the Tyrosi sellsword and his son, who had a ridiculous name, were also sitting to the side on a couch. Her father dismissed the guards and ordered them to seal the doors. Arianne, there is a reason why I didn't want you to go with Oberyn and Nymeria to the north. You'll get to travel to the north soon, but before you do so, you need to learn some truths. Doran started calmly looking at his daughter while steepling his fingers. Arianne glared at her father and refused to let his words make her react. She had enough of his usual ploys that made her feel inadequate and less informed. You must be privy to a secret before you take Harry Stark as your husband. It has to do with your late aunt. Arianne's interest was piqued immediately as she frowned at her father curiously. A secret about Anayax, curiously, forgetting her displeasure with her father momentarily. It is about her son who survived the events of King's Landing, said Doran. Her son? Arianne stared at her father with wide eyes. Yes, Dorna nodded. I'd like you to meet your cousin, Prince Aegon. Arianne watched with wide eyes as the young Griff stood up and approached her with a slight grin. Cousin, we meet at last without any need for this mummery. There is much we need to discuss about your upcoming nuptials.